The Iron Throne of Education, the Queen of Cold Decisions, Victoria Blackstone, stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, watching the morning rush at Thornfield Academy below. Students in crisp uniforms hurried across manicured lawns, their laughter floating up like distant music she'd forgotten how to hear. At 38, she had transformed her late father's modest private school into an empire of 15 elite academies across the state. But success, she'd learned, required sacrifices that others were too weak to make. The mahogany desk behind her held 3 termination letters, each one signed with her characteristic sharp signature. 3 more teachers would be gone by noon, not because they were incompetent, but because they were expensive. Veteran educators with decades of experience commanded salaries that ate into profit margins. And Victoria had built her fortune on understanding that sentiment was the enemy of success. Mrs. Helen Carter, the Academy's principal for 12 years, knocked softly before entering. Her silver hair was pulled back in its usual neat bun, but Victoria noticed the worry lines that had deepened over the past month. Helen had been fighting these decisions, pleading for each teacher Victoria had marked for removal. The Patterson termination meeting is in 10 minutes, Helen said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of defeat. Are you certain about this decision? Oh, he's taught here for 23 years. The students adore him. Victoria turned from the window, her steel-gray eyes showing no emotion. She wore power like armor, her black designer suit impeccable, her posture radiating the confidence that came from never doubting herself. Sentiment doesn't pay salaries, Helen. Patterson costs us 40% more than a fresh graduate would. The mathematics are simple, but the relationships he's built, the trust, can be rebuilt by someone younger and cheaper. Victoria moved to her desk, her heels clicking against the polished floor like a countdown. I didn't inherit a charity, Helen. I inherited a business that was hemorrhaging money, because my father let his heart rule his head. Look where it got him. Helen's voice grew smaller. Your father believed education was about more than profit. He died with mounting debts and a crumbling legacy. Victoria's words cut like glass. I've tripled our revenue in 5 years. These decisions aren't pleasant, but they're necessary. The veteran's last stand 20 minutes later. Mr. James Patterson sat across from Victoria, in the same chair where dozens of teachers had received their walking papers. At 59, he still carried himself with the quiet dignity that had made him beloved by generations of students. His weathered hands rested calmly in his lap, though Victoria could see the slight tremor that betrayed his nerves. I suppose you know why you're here, Victoria began, sliding the termination letter across the polished wood she'd perfected. This routine, keeping it brief and clinical, emotion only complicated matters. Patterson glanced at the letter, but didn't pick it up. I know you've been making changes. Heard about the others? His voice was steady, carrying the same patience he used when explaining complex problems to struggling students. Can't say I'm surprised, though I hoped maybe the years I've given this place might count for something. Your years here are appreciated, but the academy needs to evolve. Victoria's tone remained professional, though something in Patterson's calm acceptance unsettled her. Most teachers begged, argued, or stormed out. Will provide excellent references and a generous severance package. Patterson finally picked up the letter, reading it slowly. You know, Ms. Blackstone, I taught your father when he was a student here. Bright boy, always asking questions about fairness and justice. He used to say, education should plant seeds in students' hearts, not just their minds. My father was an idealist in a practical world, Victoria replied, though her voice carried less conviction than usual. Those kinds of philosophies don't create sustainable institutions. Maybe not, Patterson said, standing slowly. But they create human beings who remember why learning matters. He placed the letter back on her desk, unsigned. I'll clean out my classroom by Friday. As the door closed behind him, Victoria felt an unexpected tightness in her chest. She pushed it aside, focusing instead on the cost savings his departure would generate. Numbers were reliable. Numbers made sense. Numbers didn't judge her for choices that others lacked the courage to make. The ripple affected news of Patterson's firing spread through Thornfield Academy like wildfire. Students gathered in hushed groups, their usual chatter replaced by whispers of disbelief, In the senior English classroom, Emma Rodriguez sat staring at Patterson's empty desk, her heart heavy with something she couldn't quite name. Emma was 17, bright beyond her years, with dark eyes that seemed to absorb everything around her. She came from a working-class family, her parents stretching every dollar to afford Thornfield's tuition because they believed in the education it provided. More than that, they believed in teachers like Mr. Patterson, who saw potential in students others might overlook. "It's not right," whispered her friend Jessica, sliding into the seat beside her. "He's the best teacher we've ever had. Remember how he stayed after school for 3 hours, helping you with your college essay?" Emma remembered. She remembered a lot of things about Mr. Patterson that had nothing to do with curriculum standards or test scores. She remembered how he'd noticed when she missed lunch 3 days in a row because her family was going through a rough financial patch, and how a sandwich had mysteriously appeared on her desk every day that week. She remembered how he'd encouraged her to enter the state writing competition when she didn't think she was good enough, and how he'd celebrated her victory as if it were his own. "My brother's in Mrs. Anderson's 3rd grade class," Jessica continued. "Mom said she got fired yesterday, too. Tommy's been crying all morning." Emma's hands clenched into fists. Mrs. Anderson had taught at Thornfield for 15 years, known for her patience with struggling readers and her ability to make every child feel special. Tommy Chen, Emma's little brother, had finally started enjoying school because of Mrs. Anderson's kindness. Now he'd be starting over with a stranger, as the substitute teacher entered to announce that their regular classes were canceled. Emma made a decision that would change everything. Some things mattered more than test scores and profit margins. Some things were worth fighting for. Even if you were just 17 and supposedly powerless. That evening, while Victoria Blackstone reviewed quarterly reports in her penthouse office, Emma Rodriguez sat at her family's kitchen table with a pen and a piece of simple notebook paper. She began to write not as a student to an administrator, but as one human being to another, hoping that somewhere beneath the armor of success, Victoria Blackstone still had a heart that could remember what it meant to care. The letter that would change everything was being born, one honest word at a time. The letter that changed everything. Words from the heart. 3 days had passed since Mr. Patterson's dismissal, and Emma Rodriguez had rewritten her letter 4 times. Each draft felt too angry, too pleading, or too formal. How do you speak to someone who seems to have forgotten what it means to be human? How do you reach a heart that's been locked away behind spreadsheets and profit margins? Emma sat in her small bedroom, surrounded by crumpled papers and half-finished thoughts. Through her window, she could see Thornfield Academy in the distance, its impressive buildings gleaming in the afternoon sun. Once, those buildings had represented hope and opportunity. Now, they felt like a beautiful prison where learning was being slowly strangled by cold efficiency. Her younger brother Tommy burst through the door, his 8-year-old face streaked with tears. "Emma," they said, "Mrs. Anderson isn't coming back. Ever. The new teacher doesn't know my reading level, and she made me sit with the slow kids." His voice cracked with the particular devastation that only children feel when their safe world suddenly changes. Emma pulled Tommy onto her lap, feeling his small body shake with confusion and hurt. Mrs. Anderson had spent months building his confidence, celebrating every small victory, turning reading from a struggle into an adventure. Now, he was just another face in a classroom, another number on a roster. Why did the boss lady fire all the good teachers? Tommy asked, his innocent question cutting straight to the heart of everything Emma had been trying to understand. Daughter Emma looked down at her latest draft, the words swimming before her eyes. Suddenly, she knew what she had to write, not as a student trying to impress an administrator, not as someone asking for favors, but as a human being speaking to another human being about what really mattered. She picked up her pen and began to write her final letter. The letter reaches its destination. Victoria Blackstone arrived at her office Monday morning to find her usual stack of correspondence waiting. Board meeting agendas, financial reports, legal documents requiring her signature. She moved through them with mechanical precision, her mind already focused on the day's primary objective, identifying 3 more teachers whose salaries exceeded their perceived value. Halfway through the stack, she paused. Among the formal letterheads and typed documents was a single piece of notebook paper, folded neatly and addressed in careful handwriting to Ms. Victoria Blackstone. The return address showed it came from a student, though no specific name was given. Victoria almost set it aside. Student complaints were Helen's responsibility, not hers. But something about the careful fold, the respectful address, made her curious. She opened it and began to read. Dear Ms. Blackstone, my name is Emma Rodriguez, and I'm a senior at Thornfield Academy. I know you're very busy running the schools and making important decisions, so I appreciate you taking time to read this. I wanted to tell you about some teachers you recently let go, not to argue with your choices, but to share what they meant. To students like me, Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. Most complaint letters started with accusations or demands. This one felt different, almost conversational. Mr. Patterson taught me English for 3 years. I know his salary was probably high, and maybe younger teachers cost less money, but I wanted you to know about the day I almost dropped out of school. My family was going through hard times, and I felt ashamed because I couldn't afford the same clothes and supplies as other students. I was ready to quit and get a job to help my parents. Victoria found herself reading more slowly, her usual speed scanning technique forgotten. Mr. Patterson noticed I was struggling, not with schoolwork, but with feeling like I belonged. He never made a big deal about it. Never made me feel like charity. He just started staying after school to help me with extra credit projects, and somehow there was always a sandwich on my desk during lunch, and I won the state writing competition. Told me he'd kept every draft of my essay because he wanted to remember the moment a student found her voice. Something shifted in Victoria's chest, a sensation she hadn't felt in years. She continued reading. My little brother Tommy is 8, and he struggles with reading. Mrs. Anderson worked with him every day after school, for free, until he stopped crying about homework and started bringing books home to show our parents. Last week, Tommy read his first chapter book all by himself. Yesterday, he asked why his teacher left and if it was because he wasn't smart enough. Victoria's hand trembled slightly as she held the letter. In her mind, she could see the quarterly reports showing Mrs. Anderson's salary, the neat columns that justified her termination. But now she was seeing something else, an 8-year-old boy wondering if he'd caused his teacher to leave. I'm not writing to ask you to change your mind about the teachers who are already gone. I know business decisions are complicated, and I'm just a student who doesn't understand everything about running schools. But I wanted you to know that when you let these teachers go, you didn't just change budget numbers, you changed lives. Victoria stood and walked to her window, the letter still in her hands. Below, she could see students moving between classes. Their faces too distant to read, but their youth unmistakable. When had she stopped seeing them as individuals and started seeing them as tuition payments? The crack in the armor the letter continued, but Victoria found she had to sit down to finish reading it. I've been thinking about what makes a school great, and I don't think it's just about test scores or college acceptance rates. It's about teachers who see something special in every student, even the ones who don't see it in themselves. It's about creating a place where kids feel safe to learn and grow and make mistakes without being judged. Victoria remembered her own school days, remembered teachers who had believed in her when she doubted herself.
Ouch.
She pushed the memory away, but it lingered like an unwelcome ghost. Oh no. You inherited these schools from your father, and you probably want to make them successful. But I wanted you to know that they already were successful. Just maybe not in ways that show up in financial. REPORTS. Mr. Patterson changed my life. Mrs. Anderson changed my brother's life. How do you put a price on that? The letter's final paragraph made Victoria's throat tighten in a way she hadn't experienced since her father's funeral. I hope someday you get to see what I see when I walk through Thornfield's halls. Not just buildings and budgets, but a place where miracles happen every day in small ways. Where teachers plant seeds of hope in students who might not find it anywhere else. Where learning isn't just about preparing for tests, but about preparing for life. I hope you get to remember why education matters, not just as a business, but as a bridge between who we are and who we can become. Thank you for reading this. Respectfully, Emma Rodriguez. Victoria set the letter down with hands that shook slightly. For the first time in years, The numbers on her desk seemed less important than the words on that simple piece of notebook. Paper. She thought about her father, about his dreams for Thornfield Academy, about the idealism she'd dismissed as impractical. But mostly, she thought about Emma Rodriguez, a 17-year-old girl who had somehow seen past Victoria's armor, to the person she used to be. The person who had once believed that education could change the world, one student at a time. The transformation wouldn't happen overnight, but in that moment, sitting in her expensive office, surrounded by the trappings of success, Victoria Blackstone began to remember what it felt like to have a heart.